Hello again. In the news cycle this week, the topic of conscription seems to have reared its head a few times, what with all of the recent developments in Ukraine, etc., and the general state of our armed forces, as has been referenced by Lord Dannatt recently. It's been my experience generally that coverage of this type, with the same people being put in front of the public, the same talking heads, if you like, this is really there to essentially gauge public reaction, and this is one of the functions of politicians and other members of the media, and this is fine because it promotes discussion within society, and this is a positive thing without forcing things onto people. So in that way, I'm going to take that debate forward a little bit and look at a couple of points related to that I think is relevant. So, as we said, the Ukraine conflict itself is bringing these old debates up. Now, obviously, we've got what happened in the 20th century, which is the backdrop to all of this, and this is the historical point that all of these talking heads eventually drift to, namely that, generally speaking, societies don't like talking about war, they don't like spending on war, and they certainly don't like paying for a standing army. However, at some point in every nation's history, the same thing happens. People come to kill you, essentially, or you go to kill them, and then there's an army required. And then that happens, and there's no avoiding it, and so we need to be reminded of that periodically. And this is all fair enough to my mind. So, 3 individuals we've got here today that have made comments recently, and I think we've got a good spectrum of thoughts here. We've got an out-and-out ex-soldier in the name of Sir Richard Shirreff. We've got Tobias Elwood, who was a politician and was an ex-soldier, and we've got an MP, Paulette Hamilton, who's made comments this week also with regard to conscription. So we'll start with Sir Richard Shirreff. Just for a little bit of background, he served in the British Army for 37 years before becoming NATO's Deputy Supreme Commander of Europe. That's quite a grand title there to have before you have your cornflakes of a morning. But he's now an independent strategic consultant. You can check his website out if you wish. He founded and he's the managing partner of a company called Strategia Worldwide. And this is a company who manages risk around the globe. Now, after checking on their website, I'm personally still at a bit of a loss as to what their purpose is, though it has a corporate look and feel to it. But the man has served 37 years, so when he talks about the army, as with Lord Dannatt, you have to listen to these people. They've got a tremendous amount of experience. However, obviously, all experience is tinged with personal bias. And that's the nature of being human. So I did actually watch a podcast he done 2 months ago, which I will leave in the description of this video. It is a lengthy podcast where he discusses the nature of war, if you like, the art of war, where we are, how he feels about it, and generally the state of the British military, how he feels about politicians, etc. And it was a very, very interesting little talk to get a kind of an insight into how an ex-soldier and somebody who's experiencing these things feels about the current state of our armed forces. In fact, he actually says our leaders are timid and they don't recognise threats. And he's not at all, for the record here, he appears to be not at all on board with any form of negotiations. Certainly not a negotiation that involves Ukraine not getting a sizable chunk of something from those negotiations, and I generally don't think that's going to happen. But an interesting podcast, you might want to check that out. In this clip that I'm about to show you, this is a clip of Sir Richard providing you with his narrative and what he believes is the case for conscription.
Well, conscription to most professional soldiers, and I count myself as one, is absolute anathema. I mean, the British Army Britain's armed forces have traditionally and culturally relied on long service, volunteer, highly professional soldiers with huge experience. And that's really the way we would all want it to go on. However, we have to look at the situation. We have to look at the context. There is a real threat to peace in the Euro-Atlantic region. And the way to preserve peace is deterrence, effective military deterrence, conventional and nuclear. And that means being ready for the worst case, which is war with Russia. So what? So that means that our armed forces have got to have the numbers, the capabilities, the logistics, the training needed. And frankly, if you look at the army numbers are in freefall. It's now down at about 74,000, with forecasts going even lower. That is not an army that is ready and capable of producing a warfighting division, which I would argue is the currency of high-intensity conflict. Great if we were to get the volunteers. To get the volunteers needed is going to require a huge amount of effort and money, which is probably not there. So I think General Sanders is absolutely right to be talking about a citizen volunteer army. I think, though, that now, against all the odds, though, is the time to start thinking the unthinkable, and really having to think quite carefully about conscription if we're to deliver the numbers needed.
Okay, so what do we take from that? Well, he's quite straightforward, quite direct on the matter. He seems to think that we face a great threat. The army has been depleted beyond any reasonable amount. We need a blunt instrument here in order to facilitate bringing our army back up to a normal footing, and there's only one way to do that, and we have to think the unthinkable. Yes, that's quite a phrase, isn't it? Thinking the unthinkable. It's always good when you are, or when a talking head is in the media, as these people often are. They come up with some decent rhetoric. They come up with a good narrative, and of course you have to slap a label on there just to give the whole thing some fabulous context for the people out there. And so thinking the unthinkable is quite a catchy little catchphrase just to throw in there, just so people can kind of get it into your head that he is thinking the unthinkable, and therefore perhaps we should think the unthinkable. Now, I don't want to in any way denigrate this gentleman, because he's, I'm always grateful for people that have done any service for this country. I certainly have not done any service for this country, so, whenever I'm discussing people like Sir Richard, or any person that's a serviceman, I'm always extremely grateful for people doing that. But I am entitled to criticise what I would term a political view. Not that I'm out and out criticising it. I genuinely don't think that this a conflict that's happening in Ukraine warrants conscription. Now, the differences for me between conscription and, as a word, I did look it up beforehand, and essentially where the state comes and tells people you're going to be fighting there, so just make your way down to the office a week on Tuesday at 11 o'clock and we'll be seeing you there, and we'll make arrangements from there. The debate for me isn't about that, because I just generally don't think this would work in this country. I think the debate surrounds how can we increase our armed forces, how can we increase our military fighting capacity, whilst at the same time encouraging people to perhaps partake in our military on a voluntary basis, perhaps on a reservist basis where those numbers could be swelled if the time arose. I think what Sir Richard's doing here, he's referring to mandatory conscription. And, I genuinely don't agree with that, not for this type of conflict. I don't think it warrants it. If, there were boats sailing across the channel filled with soldiers from France was coming over the channel to take over, the United Kingdom, then certainly the mandatory would fit, and, I would be lining up along with everybody else. But this conflict in Ukraine, I don't think it warrants that level of attention. Now, on the topic of conscription, we do have to look at, well, who would we be conscripting? It would have to be the young people of this country, and some other people. The age ranges are not yet defined. So what we're really looking at and what we're talking about when we talk about conscription, we're talking about young people. So at this stage, it might be a good idea just to do a quick analysis of the young people in this country, and there's no better way really than to take this clip, I think, which is funny enough taken from the same segment that I'm going to play you a little bit later. But this is the views of some of the young people in this country as defined by ITV, and they've, I think, chosen, or they've went out of their way to choose quite a diverse set of people. They did ask a lot of women about this, or certainly young ladies about this, as well as young men. I do generally think that this is more the purview of young men who would want to sign up, but obviously in this modern day and age, young ladies would probably want to sign up as well. But this is a small cross-section of what ITV thinks is the young of this country.
But adults in Gen Z, that's 18 to 27-year-olds, seem reluctant to be part of the efforts, with a recent YouGov poll finding only 11% would fight for Britain. We asked some of them for their thoughts on joining the front line.
I'm not trained. I can't even walk up the stairs.
If it was mandatory, obviously I'd go.
I mean, the fact that you can die for your country before you can vote, there's no incentive for young people to participate.
I don't think I'd be very useful.
It's just not my vibe.
Yeah, I probably would. Come from a family of people that have served in the Royal Air Force and Army as well.
I don't think I have a good enough reason to want to give back to this country in that sense.
Just doesn't seem like something I would enjoy.
Okay then, so there's the views of some of our young people. I'm not sure I would really want some of those people there fighting or at least defending the country. They didn't seem like they were the best candidates. There were a couple of young men there who seemed like they were more up for it. Certainly one of those young men seemed to have a history, or there was a family history of being in the military, and generally speaking those types of people are more amenable to seeing active service. Now, what we're going to do now is move on to Tobias Elwood. He's a British MP. You often see him doing the media rounds when there's the army or military spending to be discussed, or all things warlike. And so what we're going to do, we're going to get his opinion here and see what he believes is the current state of play and what the best course of action could be with regard to our military and the state of our armed forces.
Yes, I mean, that's the backdrop to this, is that we've entered a new era of insecurity. Our world is getting more dangerous, not less. Russia's aggression is rising. It's increasingly backed by China. The United States is actually dialing back from its interests in Europe, and we are increasingly vulnerable, and we must prepare. There's been a big debate about increasing defense spending to 2.5%. We can't afford to keep a large standing army. So this is all about increasing our national readiness, this latent capability that we can tap into at any time. And yes, it would be Army, Air Force or Navy, but that isn't for everybody. We need skill sets in, for example, our coast guards, our ambulance, our defense industry, for example, and specifically in the digital world, cybersecurity experts, air traffic controllers, AI, and so on. So it's an all of society approach. And Finland is where they're already doing this, a very small country, just 5 million. They have an armed force of about 30,000. If mobilized, it can swell to 300,000 in a time of crisis. And that's a real deterrent. And that's actually what's helped them hold that line against Russia. So this is the bigger picture that we need to face. What happens if we don't do this? What are the consequences then?
Okay, so Mr. Elwood seems to think that the Finnish model is a good way for us to go. He doesn't believe that a standing army is affordable, for want of a better way to put it, and he quotes some of the army numbers from Finland. And so looking at that, if we were to transpose that into figures in this country, which Mr. Elwood is keen to not do that because I don't think people would have liked those numbers. If you're looking at 30,000 people out of 5 million versus 300,000 out of 5 million, which is the count with the standing army and the reservists, if you're going to transpose that into UK numbers, then you're looking at something akin to 420,000 people being in our standing army. And the full army with all of the reservists there would swell to 4.2 million, which is quite a large army by global standards today. So that's what Finland are doing. That's what Mr. Elwood is advocating for. So approximately 420,000 people, standing army, continually being trained, etc., and 4.2 million ready to go. Now, I would put it to you that would mean that the defence spending would have to severely increase. It needs to be borne in mind that the Finnish economy is completely separate to the UK economy. They have higher employment, higher salaries, lower welfare, virtually no immigration. It's a homogenised country. And so there is a completely different set of economic parameters for Finland. But nonetheless, Mr. Elwood thinks that that's a good idea for us to do, and I'll leave it up to you to decide whether you think that's the case. So we're going to move on to the comments which were directly after Mr. Elwood, and these come from a sociology lecturer.
I mean, Tobias Elwood pointing out there, we're at a critical time. We need all of society to do their bit for our own good.
But we are asking that of an extremely divided society. And I think there are two things here. Tobias mentioned Finland. Well, Finland's probably, it's a smaller country, and they've probably got an identity, a national identity that wants to sort of protect and preserve its country. We've got to be realistic and honest here. We've got an extremely divided society. And whether our young people, they've already said that they don't think that their stake in the country is as such where they would want to go and fight. And although, yes, there'll be jobs in technology and AI, ultimately, you are saying that you could give your life. Ultimately, as we've seen in many, many wars previously, that young men and women come back in coffins, draped in the Union Jack.
But we've been here before. I'm just looking at my history book here. In 1933, there was the famous debate at the Oxford Union on the motion, this House will under no circumstances fight for king and country, and it passed with an overwhelming majority. 6 years later, the students making that debate were in khaki and fighting for their king and country.
Yeah, perhaps not all of them, because one of the things about this is that it's unevenly spread. If you have a look at who the British Army is now and the military is now, it's overwhelmingly white working class boys. And that's, for me, that's probably the problem here, is that the people that are expected to go and fight, the people who are expected to go and be patriotic and do their duty are always the same people.
So this lady covers quite a few points here. She has the look and feel of a woke college lecturer, the sociology lecturer, but she does make some okay points on who goes to war, etc. A first point here about Finland I found to be annoying, which were, well, obviously it's different for the Finnish people, because their culture, you see, they would want to protect and preserve that culture, and they're not as divided as we were. And really what you have to understand is we have to be honest with ourselves and say that our young people don't have anything to protect, and they really don't have anything to preserve. And it may be the case that this lady is part of that problem, I don't know, but it's this type of rhetoric that I don't like. Really, this type of rhetoric it denigrates our nation and makes out that the cultures of other people, other nations, are somehow superior to ours in some way, in that they would obviously want to protect and preserve their culture, but not us. She then moves on to discuss an oft-talked point, which is that the white working class boys of this country are often denigrated in the media and forgotten about, particularly in the education system and in achievements and in employment more recently and all of that. However, when there's a war, they find a way to find these people, and they're the ones that often go marching to war while they sing songs about it. And this is a part of history, and it's part of the history of this country. And I believe if the same thing happened again, it would be those same white working class boys walking to war. So all in all, I think a fair point at the end, but the earlier points, I think, speak to the general ethos of the educational establishment and how they just kind of sigh and the little grimace when they talk about coffins draped in Union Jack flags. And obviously our society is not as special as Finland's society, and all of this is perpetually preached in our education system. And this is part of one of the reasons why this lady was saying our society is so divided. I believe she's part of the reason why that might be the case. Okay, so our final person in the public is a Birmingham MP who is demanding. So Birmingham MP demands serious conscription discussions amid Ukraine troops offer. So this Paulette Hamilton MP is calling on young people to take their heads out of the sand and says our borders are being threatened. So this is quite a more extreme line than the previous people have discussed. And this Birmingham MP has raised in what she calls the spectre of military conscription for the British public if the UK opted to put boots on the ground in Ukraine. Erdington's Paulette Hamilton told TV viewers today that young people can no longer bury their heads in the sand as our borders are being threatened. She's actually said that and really did outline this in quite succinct terms, that we can no longer bury their heads in the sand. She's talking about the young people here. Our borders are being threatened. And she said these words on Channel 5's Jeremy Vine show. Not a show I have a catch, I have to be honest here, but that was the things that she said, and she said that quite brazenly. She went on to say that the Prime Minister has expressed his willingness to deploy British troops in a peacekeeping role alongside forces from other countries should a deal be done to end the war. So what she's saying is we need to be sending troops, even if a deal's done, we need to be sending troops to patrol that border, or a peacekeeping role along with other countries. But Russia, of course, said this week that any such presence in Ukraine would be completely unacceptable. Now, she did say, I do think we need to start serious discussions around conscription because young people are not engaged, but they're going to have to because our borders are being threatened and you cannot continue to bury your head in the sand. She went on, this is down to Europe through NATO getting its act together. We have relied on America to supply arms, to supply the support. They have now said they will not do it. As a group of nations, we are going to have to come together. We're going to have to increase the money that we give through GDP, and I think it will have to go up to 5%. Well, there you have it. So this lady here believes that we need to be doubling defence spending at a minimum, and we need to be proposing to our young people and getting it into their heads that war is coming, our borders are being threatened, and even if there's a deal done, we need to be sending peacekeepers en masse into Ukraine to patrol the borders. Now, this whole bit of rhetoric from this lady here goes directly against left-wing politics. It seems very strange to me that at one point in history it was always really viewed as the right wing who was always about law and order, strong borders, strong military, big police presence, along with all the rest of the stuff like small government, etc. And it was always the left wing It was always the left that was kind of totally against this stuff. And what you've noticed, or you may have noticed recently, is there's been a kind of a polar shift here. And now, a lot of the people in the media that are talking about continuing this war, they're from the left. And a lot of people are actually saying, we need to have a peace deal here to stop the bodies piling up. They're on the right. And I just think that is a very, very strange turn of events. And it's funny how political bias can turn on a sixpence sometimes when nobody's actually looking. And that appears to have happened in this case, but those are the comments from the lady. You can take them as you will. So what can we take from looking at this? What's our conclusion, taking all of this in the whole, in the round, and going forward? Well, my personal belief is, as Sir Richard said at the start, he believes our armed forces have been depleted to the point where we can't really engage in active combat, echoing the thoughts of Lord Dannatt, going in direct contravention to what Sir Keir Starmer seems to want to believe, that we're going to just whack some troops on the ground and the job's a good one. So I do believe that Sir Richard got that right about the fact that, our army is in a total shambles at the moment. I believe that his comments on mandatory conscription, I don't think that would work in this country. There is a debate to be had about the Finnish model, looking at what Tobias Elwood said and Sir Richard, because at the moment our young people are essentially told you can't leave school as people used to at 16 and just get a job. You've got to stay in some type of training or education. And so I believe for quite a large number of people, having a national service option would certainly be a better alternative than putting those people through a college course or whatever it is that they didn't want to do. I do believe as well that the standing army, with the reservist thing where, these reservist type people may receive a year or two of training, possibly in the 16, 18-year-old category. And then, 2-3 weeks each year, they get a bit of a top-up, bit of a reminder about what it is. And should a conflict ever arise, then we could bring all of these people to bear. And I do believe that providing some sort of financial incentive, possibly, to have these reservists and take them away for a certain amount of time each year, that's going to certainly provide a ways and means for people to enter into this agreement with the state and the government. At that point, I would finally make is I do find it very, very strange that the left of politics appears to be quite into war at the moment, and the right of politics is generally seems to be the ones that are seeking peace at the moment, while having deeper discussions about the nature of war, the nature of armed forces. But as ever, these debates will go on and on. It's very, very difficult for the state, and I do recognise this, that it's difficult for the state to balance economics with the standing army count. But I don't think in any way that the state itself has thought through what the best way to do this is. These points raised by Sir Richard and Tobias Elwood are very, very good points. We can look at a more modern day army. Do I think mandatory conscription would work? No, but I definitely think in the modern day it's certainly worth considering what our young people aged 16 to 18, would they like an option of doing some level of national service and perhaps putting their name down, if they wanted to, for some active duty if ever it were to arise. I don't believe that this Ukraine conflict warrants anything like this, but certainly what this conflict has done, it's thrown up these types of arguments. And yet again, it just shows our governments, our successive governments are actually incapable of having this level of structured debate around anything. Periodically, these people do pop up and they'll bring this stuff up, and of course it just gets swept under the rug until somebody like Keir Starmer pops along and starts throwing 10,000 to 40,000 troops around the place as if they're pieces on a chessboard. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks very much for your time as ever, and all the best.